The old community center on Maple Street had seen better days. Its paint was peeling, the roof leaked when it rained hard, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. But for the people of Greenfield, a small town in Pennsylvania, it was more than just a building. It was where children learned to dance, where families celebrated birthdays, and where neighbors gathered when someone needed help. On a cold Tuesday afternoon in March, a group of 5 people sat around a folding table in the main hall. They were planning the annual Spring Talent Show, an event meant to raise money for the center's much-needed repairs. The conversation was loud and full of laughter as they argued about who should host and what kind of refreshments to serve. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store downtown, was leading the discussion. He was the kind of man who always had a joke ready and loved being the center of attention. His friends found him funny. Others in town thought he could be a bit much sometimes. "We need something special this year," Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "Something that'll get people talking. The Johnsons are moving away, so we won't have their magic act. We need a replacement." His sister Beth nodded. "The talent show has been the same acts for 3 years now. If we want people to buy tickets, we need to give them something different." Just then, the front door of the community center opened. A woman walked in carrying a worn black case. She was in her late 60s with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and glasses that slipped down her nose. She wore a long brown coat that looked like it had been around for decades. This was Linda Chen, the town librarian. She'd lived in Greenfield for 15 years, but most people didn't know much about her. She was always polite, always quiet. She stamped books, recommended stories to children, and kept the library running smoothly. Beyond that, she was a mystery. Linda walked past the group without saying hello, heading toward the small office at the back where the center kept old records and supplies. She needed to check something about the library's storage space rental. Tom watched her go, his eyes landing on the black case in her hand. A grin slowly spread across his face. "Hey," he said to his friends, keeping his voice low. "Isn't that a violin case?" Beth glanced over her shoulder. "I think so. I've seen her carry it a few times. Never thought about it much." Tom's grin grew wider. "I just got an idea." His friend Kevin, who taught at the local high school, looked skeptical. "What kind of idea?" "What if we asked the librarian to play at the talent show?" Tom said, barely holding back a laugh. There was a moment of silence. Then Beth started giggling. "Tom, that's mean." "It's not mean," Tom said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "We need acts, right? Maybe she can actually play. You never know." Kevin shook his head. "Come on, man. She's just a quiet old lady who works at the library. What if you embarrass her?" "Or," Tom countered, standing up, "what if she's been waiting for someone to ask? Either way, it'll be interesting." Before anyone could stop him, Tom walked toward the back office. His friends exchanged glances. Beth looked uncomfortable, but she didn't call him back. Tom knocked on the office door frame. Linda was inside, flipping through a filing cabinet. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Hello?" she said softly. "Can I help you?" "Actually, I wanted to ask you something," Tom said, putting on his friendliest smile. "We're organizing the Spring Talent Show next month. It's for a good cause, fixing up this old place. I noticed you have a violin case, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in performing." Linda's expression didn't change. She just looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Tom kept talking, filling the silence. "We'd love to have some variety in the show. It would be great to have some live music, you know? Classical stuff. People love that." Another long pause. Tom's smile started to feel forced. He'd expected her to make an excuse, to say no right away. That would have been funny enough, but she was just standing there looking at him like she could see right through him. Finally, Linda spoke. "What date is the show?" Tom blinked. April 20th. It's a Saturday evening." "What time would I need to perform?" "We're thinking 7 o'clock start. Acts are about 5 to 10 minutes each." Linda closed the filing cabinet. She picked up her violin case and held it close to her chest, like it was something precious. I'll do it, she said simply. Tom hadn't prepared for this response. You will? I mean, that's great. That's really great. So you play violin? I do. How long have you been playing? A long time, Linda said. She moved past him toward the door. Please put me down for a 10-minute slot. I'll need to be the last performer. The last one? Wouldn't you rather go earlier? Linda paused at the doorway. Last, please, thank you for asking me. And then she was gone, walking out of the community center into the gray afternoon. Tom stood there for a moment, confused. Then he walked back to his friends, who were all staring at him. Well? Beth asked. What happened? She said yes. Tom said slowly. She's actually going to do it. Kevin laughed. No way. I'm serious. She wants to go last even. Said she needs 10 minutes. The group looked at each other. What had started as Tom's joke had suddenly become real. Now they had to follow through. Maybe she's actually good, Beth offered. We don't know. Tom shrugged, his earlier excitement fading into something else. Maybe guilt, though he wouldn't admit it. I guess we'll find out. Over the next few days, word spread around Greenfield. Tom told people at the hardware store. Beth mentioned it at the salon. Kevin's students heard about it. Soon it felt like the whole town knew that Linda Chen, the quiet librarian, was going to play violin at the talent show. Most people were curious. Some were excited. A few were skeptical. At the library, Linda went about her work as usual. If she heard the whispers or noticed the curious glances, she didn't show it. She checked out books, answered questions, and organized the children's reading corner. But there was one person who noticed a change in her. Helen Morrison, who owned the cafe across the street from the library, had been friendly with Linda for years. They often had tea together on Linda's break. I heard about the talent show, Helen said one afternoon as they sat by the cafe window. Linda nodded, stirring sugar into her tea. Are you nervous? Helen asked gently. Linda thought about this. Not nervous exactly. It's been a very long time since I played for anyone. Why did you say yes? Linda looked out the window at the people walking by, living their ordinary lives. Because I need to, she said quietly. And because someone finally asked. Helen wanted to know more, but something in Linda's voice told her not to push. So they sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea while the afternoon light faded. Neither of them knew that in the weeks to come, everything would change. The talent show would become the talk of the town for years. And Linda, the woman everyone thought they knew, would reveal a part of herself that had been hidden for more than 40 years. But that afternoon, all that lay ahead was unknown. For now there was just tea, friendship, and the quiet promise of something yet to come. Helen Morrison had known Linda Chen for 12 years, ever since she'd opened her cafe across from the library. But even after all that time, she realized she knew very little about the woman's past. Linda never talked about where she'd lived before Greenfield. She never mentioned family except for her late husband. She didn't share stories about her younger days or talk about old friends. It was like her life had started the day she arrived, in town, already in her 50s, already quiet and reserved. But that violin case. Helen had seen it before, many times over the years. Linda always handled it with such care, like it held something more valuable than just an instrument. 2 days after their conversation at the cafe, Helen decided to ask. She found Linda during her lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the library eating a sandwich she'd brought from home. Can I join you? Helen asked. Linda smiled and moved her bag to make room. Of course. They sat for a moment, watching cars pass by on Main Street. Finally, Helen spoke. I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long have you been playing violin? Linda was quiet for so long that Helen thought she might not answer. Then she said, I started when I was 5 years old. That's a long time. Yes, a very long time. Helen waited. Sometimes silence was the best way to encourage someone to talk. Linda took a deep breath. I grew up in New York City. My parents were immigrants from Taiwan. They worked very hard, running a small restaurant. When they noticed I had an interest in music, they saved every penny to give me lessons. This was more than Linda had ever shared. Helen stayed quiet, afraid that if she spoke, Linda might stop. I was good at it, Linda continued, her voice soft. Better than good, actually. By the time I was 12, I was playing in youth orchestras. At 16, I was accepted to a prestigious music conservatory. My teachers said I had a gift. They said I could be great. Helen could hear something in Linda's voice now. Not pride, exactly. More like the memory of a dream from long ago. I practiced 6, sometimes 8 hours a day. The violin wasn't just what I did. It was who I was. Every performance, every competition, every opportunity, I gave everything I had, and it worked. By the time I was 24, I'd won several awards. I was invited to play with professional orchestras. My teacher arranged for me to have a solo debut at Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall? Helen couldn't hide her surprise. That's incredible. Linda nodded slowly. It was supposed to be in October of 1982. Everything was arranged. The program was printed. My parents had invited everyone they knew. I was rehearsing constantly, perfecting every note. This was going to be the performance that launched my professional career. She paused, and Helen noticed her hands had tightened around her sandwich wrapper. 3 weeks before the performance, I was driving home late from a rehearsal. It was raining. A truck ran a red light. Linda's voice had become almost emotionless, like she was reading facts from a book. The crash wasn't terrible. I didn't break any bones, but my left hand went through the side window. The glass cut deep. Helen gasped softly, but Linda kept talking. They rushed me to the hospital. The doctors did their best. They saved my hand, saved my fingers, but the nerves were damaged. Some of them couldn't be repaired. My ring finger and pinky finger on my left hand, they still work, but not the way they did before. The coordination is gone. The precision I'd spent 20 years developing just vanished in one moment. Oh, Linda, Helen whispered. I tried to recover. I went to physical therapy for months. I practiced even though it hurt, even though I could hear how different I sounded. My teacher tried to be encouraging, but we both knew I would never play at the level I had before. The Carnegie Hall performance was canceled. The opportunities dried up. Everything I'd worked for, everything I was supposed to be, it all disappeared. Helen reached over and gently touched Linda's arm. I'm so sorry. Linda looked down at her left hand, flexing her fingers slowly. I fell into a deep depression. I stopped playing completely. I couldn't bear to hold the violin and know I'd never sound the way I once did. My parents were heartbroken, not for themselves, but for me. They'd watched me lose my future. What did you do? I moved away from New York. I couldn't stay there, couldn't be around the music world anymore. I took random jobs, moved from city to city. I was lost for a few years. Linda's expression softened slightly. Then I met David. This was the first time Helen had heard Linda speak her husband's name out loud. I met him at a support group for people dealing with grief and loss. He'd lost his mother to cancer and was struggling. I was dealing with my own loss, even though it wasn't a person. We understood each other. We started talking, then having coffee, then spending every day together. He sounds like he was a good man. The best, Linda said, and her voice cracked just a little. He was a teacher, kind, patient, gentle. He never knew me as the violin prodigy. He just knew me as Linda, the woman who liked to read and take long walks and drink tea. He loved me for who I was, not who I used to be. Did you tell him about your music? Eventually. But he never pushed me to play. He just accepted that it was part of my past. We built a simple life together. We moved here to Greenfield, away from everything. We were happy. Really happy. Helen had seen Linda and David together a few times before he passed away. They'd always seemed content, walking hand in hand down Main Street, shopping at the farmer's market, sitting together on their porch. After David died 3 years ago, Linda continued, I was going through his things. In the back of our bedroom closet, I found a violin case. Inside was a beautiful violin. There was a note with it in his handwriting. Linda pulled a small folded piece of paper from her pocket. It looked like it had been read many times, the creases worn soft. She opened it carefully and read aloud. My dear Linda, I bought this for you 10 years ago, hoping that someday you might want to play again. Not because you have to, and not to be who you once were, but because music is part of your soul. and souls shouldn't stay silent forever. Whether you ever play it or not, know that I love you. Always, David. Helen felt tears in her eyes. That's beautiful. I cried for hours when I found it, Linda said, carefully folding the note and putting it back in her pocket. At first, I couldn't even open the case, but gradually I started playing. Just for myself in my living room. I played simple songs, children's songs. I didn't try to be perfect. I just tried to feel the music again. And now you're going to play at the talent show? Linda nodded. I know Tom was making fun of me when he asked. I could see it in his face. His friends probably thought it would be funny to watch the old librarian embarrass herself. You don't have to do it, Helen said firmly. You don't have to prove anything to them. I'm not doing it for them, Linda said, looking directly at Helen. I'm doing it for David. He believed I could play again, not as the prodigy I was, but as the person I am now. He gave me that gift, and I never got to thank him. This is my thank you. What are you going to play? Linda smiled, and it was the first real smile Helen had seen from her in days. A piece David and I loved. It's not famous, not something most people would know, but it meant something to us. It's beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. They sat together for a while longer, not talking, just being present. The lunch break ended, and Linda stood up, gathering her things. Thank you for listening, she said to Helen. I haven't told anyone that story in a very long time. Thank you for trusting me with it, Helen replied. As Linda walked back into the library, Helen stayed on the bench thinking about everything she'd just heard. She thought about the young woman who'd lost her dream, about the love that helped her heal, about the courage it took to pick up that violin again after so many years. And she thought about the talent show in a few weeks. Tom and his friends had no idea what they'd set in motion. They thought they were going to see an old woman struggle through a simple song. They had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. The community center had a basement that most people forgot existed. It was used mainly for storage, boxes of old decorations and forgotten equipment piled in corners. The air down there was cool and slightly musty, and the fluorescent lights flickered sometimes. This is where Linda began to practice. She came in the evenings, after the library closed and after most people had gone home. She'd use the side entrance, carrying her violin case, and make her way down the creaky wooden stairs. In the far corner of the basement, there was a small, clear space near the furnace. It wasn't much, but it was private. The first night she played, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the bow. It had been years since she'd performed for anyone, even just the thought of it. She stood in that dim basement, surrounded by shadows and silence, and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But then she thought of David's note, still in her pocket where she kept it always. She thought of his faith in her, and she began to play. The sounds that came out weren't beautiful at first. Her fingers felt stiff. The notes cracked and wavered. Her damaged hand couldn't move the way she remembered. She had to stop several times, frustrated with herself, fighting back tears. This is impossible, she whispered to the empty room. But she didn't pack up and leave. Instead, she started again. And again. And again. Frank Peterson, the community center's janitor, was the first person to hear her. He'd worked at the center for 30 years, and he knew every sound the old building made. So when he heard music floating up from the basement one evening, he was curious. He was 72 years old, a widower who'd lost his wife 5 years back. He'd taken the janitor job after retiring from the factory, mainly because he didn't like being alone in his empty house. The community center gave him purpose, gave him people to talk to, even if it was just saying hello. Frank stood at the top of the basement stairs, listening. The music was strange. It would flow smoothly for a few measures, then stumble. Beautiful passages were followed by harsh, frustrated sounds. It was like hearing someone have a conversation with themselves, arguing and agreeing, struggling and succeeding. He didn't go down. Whoever was playing clearly wanted privacy. But from that night on, whenever he heard the music, he'd pause in his work and listen. Over the next 3 weeks, Frank heard Linda's progress. The stumbles became less frequent. The beautiful passages grew longer. There was still something raw about the playing, something imperfect, but that imperfection somehow made it more powerful. It sounded real in a way that perfect music sometimes didn't. One evening, about 10 days before the talent show, Frank was mopping the main hall when the music stopped abruptly. He heard footsteps on the stairs, and Linda emerged from the basement, her eyes red. She looked startled to see him. "Oh, hello, Frank. I didn't know anyone was still here." "Just finishing up," he said gently. "I hope the noise from my mop bucket didn't disturb you." Linda shook her head. "No, I needed to stop for tonight." They stood awkwardly for a moment. Frank wanted to say something about the music, to tell her how beautiful it was, but he didn't want to embarrass her by admitting he'd been listening. Linda made the decision for him. "You've heard me practicing, haven't you?" Frank nodded slowly. "I have. I hope you don't mind." "No," Linda said, and she almost smiled. "Actually, it's nice to know someone was listening. Makes it feel less like I'm just playing for ghosts." "It's beautiful," Frank said. "Whatever you're preparing for. The talent show." Frank had heard about it, of course. The whole town was talking about it. Most people were coming because of the rumor that the librarian was going to perform. Some were genuinely curious. Others, he suspected, were coming to see if Tom's joke would pay off. "I think people are going to be surprised," Frank said carefully. Linda's expression hardened slightly. "I know why Tom asked me. I know what he expected. What they all expect." "Then why are you doing it?" Linda looked down at her violin case. "Because I need to prove something to myself. Not to them. To myself. I need to know if I can still do this, even if I'm not what I used to be." Frank leaned on his mop handle. "My wife used to say that getting older means losing things. Strength, speed, perfect memory. But she also said that if you're lucky, you gain something too. Perspective, maybe. Understanding. The ability to see what really matters." Linda looked at him with new interest. "Your wife sounds like she was wise." "She was," Frank said, his voice soft. "I miss her every day, but I try to remember what she taught me. We're not supposed to be the same people we were when we were young. We're supposed to be something different, maybe something better, in ways that matter more." They talked for a while longer, two people who understood loss and the courage it took to keep going. When Linda finally left that night, she felt less alone. Meanwhile, word about the talent show continued to spread through Greenfield. Tom's hardware store became an unofficial hub for gossip about it. "I heard she's playing classical music," one customer said. "My cousin said she used to be some kind of professional musician," another added. "That can't be true," someone else countered. "She's just a librarian." Tom heard all of this, and he felt increasingly uncomfortable. What had started as a thoughtless joke had taken on a life of its own. He'd seen Linda at the library a few days earlier, checking out a book for his daughter. She'd been polite as always, had asked about his family, had smiled when his daughter thanked her. She was just a nice, quiet person who minded her own business. And he'd set her up to be laughed at. His sister Beth noticed his mood. "Having second thoughts?" she asked one afternoon when they were alone in the store. "I don't know," Tom admitted. "Maybe. You could talk to her. Tell her she doesn't have to do it." "What would I say?" "Sorry, I only asked you as a joke and now I feel bad about it." "That would make it worse." Beth sighed. "Then I guess we just have to see what happens." But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake. He started, having dreams about the talent show, about Linda standing on stage while people laughed. In the dreams, she'd look right at him, and he'd feel ashamed. Back in the basement of the community center, Linda continued to practice. Her playing grew stronger each night. The piece she'd chosen was about 7 minutes long, and it told a story. It began quietly, almost sadly. Then it built to moments of joy and celebration. It crashed into passages of grief and loss. And finally, it resolved into something peaceful, something that accepted both the happiness and the pain as part of the same journey. It was perfect for what she wanted to say. 5 days before the show, Helen came to listen. Linda had invited her, the only person she'd specifically asked to hear her practice. They sat in the basement, Helen on an old folding chair, Linda standing near the furnace with her violin. "I'm nervous," Linda admitted. "That's okay," Helen said. "It would be strange if you weren't." Linda raised the violin and began to play. Helen sat very still, barely breathing. The music filled the small basement, echoing off the concrete walls. It was imperfect in technical ways. There were moments where Linda's damaged fingers couldn't quite execute what she clearly intended, but those imperfections somehow made it more human, more honest. When Linda finished, there were tears running down Helen's face. "Linda," she whispered, "that was. I don't even have words." "You think it's good enough?" "Good enough?" Helen stood up and hugged her friend. "It's more than good enough. It's real, it's true. Anyone who hears that and doesn't feel something isn't really listening." Linda hugged her back, and for the first time in weeks she felt ready. The night of the talent show was coming. The room would be full of people, some supportive, some skeptical, some just there for entertainment. Tom would be there with his guilt. Frank would be there, already knowing what beauty was coming. Helen would be there as a friend, and Linda would be there, not as the prodigy she'd once been, but as the woman she'd become. She would play with her imperfect hands and her wounded history. She would play for David, who'd believed in her, and she would play for herself to prove that broken things could still make beautiful music. The stage was set. All that remained was the performance itself. The night of April 20th arrived with clear skies and a gentle spring breeze. By 6:30, cars were already filling the parking lot at the community center. People came from all over Greenfield, and some even drove in from neighboring towns after hearing about the event. Inside, the main hall had been transformed. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage that had been decorated with borrowed curtains and potted plants. The lighting was simple, just the overhead fixtures and 2 spotlights that Tom had rented. But there was an energy in the air, a buzz of conversation and anticipation. Linda arrived early, using the side entrance to avoid the crowd. She wore a navy blue dress that she'd kept in the back of her closet for years. It was the dress she'd worn to marry David, simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a modest neckline. She'd paired it with her only good shoes and a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. In the small room behind the stage where performers were gathering, she sat quietly, holding her violin case on her lap. Around her, other acts were warming up. 3 teenage girls practiced their dance routine in the corner. A man in a suit shuffled through note cards for his comedy act. A young boy kept dropping the juggling balls he was supposed to perform with, his mother patiently retrieving them. Helen found Linda just before 7. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Linda said honestly. "My hands won't stop shaking." "That's adrenaline. It'll help you once you start playing." Helen squeezed her shoulder. "Remember, you're not doing this for them. You're doing this for David. For yourself." Linda nodded, touching the pocket where she kept David's note. Out in the hall, the seats were filling quickly. Tom sat in the 3rd row with his sister Beth and several friends. He'd barely slept the night before, his conscience eating at him. Beth kept glancing at him, knowing exactly what he was thinking. "It's going to be fine," she whispered. "You don't know that," Tom replied. Frank the janitor stood in the back, preferring to remain on his feet. He'd worn his best shirt for the occasion. Next to him were several other community center regulars, people who'd lived in Greenfield their whole lives. At 7 o'clock sharp, Beth's husband Richard walked onto the stage to host the show. He welcomed everyone, made a few jokes, and explained that all the ticket money would go toward fixing the center's roof and updating the heating system. The crowd applauded. The first act was the 3 teenage girls with their dance routine. They performed to a pop song, their movements energetic if not perfectly synchronized. The audience clapped enthusiastically. Next came a 10-year-old singing a song from a popular movie. Her voice was sweet, and when she forgot the words halfway through, the audience sang along to help her. Everyone cheered when she finished. The comedy act got mixed reactions. Some jokes landed, others fell flat, but the performer smiled through it all. The juggling boy only dropped his balls twice, which his mother loudly declared was a personal record. There was a piano player who performed a jazz piece, a group of children who recited poetry, and a husband and wife who sang a duet they'd written themselves. Each act received warm applause. The atmosphere was supportive, friendly. People were having a good time. But everyone was waiting for the last performance. The librarian with the violin. Whispers rippled through the crowd between acts. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of performances, Richard returned to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final act this evening. Please welcome Linda Chen. The applause was polite but curious. People sat up straighter, craning their necks to see. Linda walked onto the stage, carrying her violin. The stage lights were brighter than she'd expected, and for a moment she couldn't see the audience clearly. Maybe that was better. She could hear the whispers, though. Quiet comments that weren't quite quiet enough. That's the librarian? She looks nervous. This should be interesting. In the third row, Tom felt his stomach twist. In the back, Frank stood perfectly still, already knowing what was coming. Linda reached the center of the stage. She stood there for a moment, her violin at her side, looking out at the crowd. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She almost turned and walked off. It would be easier. Less scary. She could apologize, say she wasn't feeling well, and leave with what dignity she had left. But then she thought of David. She thought of the violin he'd bought for her, hoping she'd play again. She thought of all the nights in the basement, working through her fear and her limitations. She thought of the young woman she'd been, before the accident, before the loss, when music had been her whole world. She wasn't that young woman anymore. She would never be that person again. But maybe, just maybe, she could be something else, something real. Linda raised the violin to her shoulder. The whispers in the crowd stopped. Everyone was watching now. Her left hand found the fingerboard, her damaged fingers finding their positions. Her right hand lifted the bow. For just a second, she closed her eyes. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. A simple melody that sounded sad and distant, like a memory from long ago. Some people in the audience shifted in their seats, still waiting to see if this would be good or bad. But then something happened. The melody began to grow, to build. Linda's bow moved across the strings with increasing confidence. The music started to tell a story, painting pictures with sound. There was joy in it now, bright passages that made you think of sunshine and laughter. Her fingers moved along the strings, and yes, they weren't perfect. Sometimes she couldn't quite reach the note she was aiming for. Sometimes the transition wasn't as smooth as it should have been. But none of that mattered. Because what was coming from that violin wasn't about technical perfection. It was about feeling. It was about truth. The music shifted again, darker now. Deep, aching notes that spoke of loss and grief. This was the sound of a heart breaking, of dreams dying, of saying goodbye to someone you loved. Several people in the audience felt tears starting to form, though they couldn't explain why. Tom sat frozen in his seat. He'd expected. He didn't know what he'd expected. Maybe something embarrassing, something amateur, but this was stripping away every wall he'd built, reaching into places he didn't like to look at. He thought of his own losses, his own regrets. A tear rolled down his cheek and he didn't wipe it away. Beth was crying openly now. So was Helen. Frank's weathered face was wet with tears, but he was smiling. All around the room, the same thing was happening. This wasn't just music. This was someone bearing their soul, sharing their pain and their hope and their humanity. And in doing so, Linda was giving permission for everyone else to feel their own buried emotions. The music climbed higher, urgent and passionate. Linda's whole body moved with it now. Her damaged hand was doing things it shouldn't be able to do, driven by pure emotion. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her eyes were closed, lost in the music, and then gradually the storm began to calm. The notes softened. The melody that had started the piece returned, but it was different now. It was the same theme, but transformed by everything that had come before. It wasn't sad anymore. It was peaceful. It was acceptance. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything and found a way to keep living, who had been broken and learned that broken things could still be whole in a different way. The final notes hung in the air, lingering like the last light of sunset. Linda held her bow on the strings for a moment after the sound faded, then slowly lowered her violin. She opened her eyes. The hall was completely silent. 200 people and not one of them made a sound. They just sat there stunned, many with tears streaming down their faces. Linda stood on that stage, breathing hard, suddenly aware of what she'd just done. She'd opened herself completely in front of all these people. She'd shown them everything. For a long moment, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The silence stretched on. Had she failed? Was it awful? Then Frank started clapping. Just him at first, his weathered hands coming together in steady rhythm. Then Helen joined him, then someone else. And someone else. And suddenly the entire room exploded into applause. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, rising to their feet in waves. The sound was thunderous, overwhelming. Linda stood there, overwhelmed, hardly believing what was happening. These were the same people who'd come to see if the quiet librarian would embarrass herself. Now they were standing, many still crying, applauding like they'd witnessed something sacred, because they had. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Linda stood on that stage, her violin still in her hands, watching as 200 people gave her a standing ovation. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were holding on to the people next to them. The sound washed over her like a wave, and for the first time in 40 years, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever. She felt seen. Not as the prodigy she'd been. Not as the success she was supposed to become, but as the person she actually was, with all her scars and imperfections and hard-won strength. Richard, the host, had to wait several minutes before the crowd quieted enough for him to speak. When he finally did, his own voice was thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Chen." Another wave of applause. Linda gave a small bow, then walked off the stage on shaking legs. As soon as she was out of sight, she leaned against the wall, her heart still racing. Helen was there immediately, pulling her into a tight hug. "You did it," Helen whispered. "Oh, Linda, you did it." Linda couldn't speak. She just held on to her friend and let the tears come. Outside in the hall, people were gathering their things, but nobody seemed to want to leave. Small groups stood talking, their voices animated. The other performers who'd gone earlier were forgotten. Everyone was talking about Linda. "I had no idea," one woman said to her husband. "I came here expecting something completely different. Did you see Tom Bradley crying?" Someone else whispered. "I've never seen him show emotion like that." Tom was, in fact, still sitting in his seat long after most people had stood up. Beth sat beside him, giving him space. His face was wet with tears he hadn't bothered to hide. "I'm an idiot," he finally said. "Yes," Beth agreed gently. "But you can fix it," Tom nodded slowly. He stood up and made his way through the crowd toward the backstage area. People were clustered near the door, hoping to congratulate Linda. Tom waited, not pushing forward, not sure he had the right to speak to her at all. Frank appeared beside him. "That was something, wasn't it?" "I don't even have words for it," Tom admitted. "Frank, I need to apologize to her. I need to tell her what I did, why I asked her to perform." "She already knows," Frank said quietly. "She knew from the beginning." Tom looked at him in surprise. "Then why did she agree to do it?" "Because she wasn't doing it for you. She was doing it for herself." Frank patted Tom's shoulder. "But I think she'd still appreciate hearing you say it." Eventually, the crowd around the backstage door thinned. Linda had been talking to people, accepting their compliments with quiet grace. When Tom finally approached, she was alone with Helen, holding a bouquet of flowers someone had brought. "Linda," Tom said, his voice rough. "Could I talk to you for a minute?" Helen looked at Linda, who nodded. Helen stepped away, giving them privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Tom struggled to find words. "I don't know how to say this except to just say it. When I asked you to perform, it wasn't because I thought you'd be good. It was because I thought it would be funny. I was making fun of you." Linda didn't look surprised. "I know. You knew. Of course I knew. I could see it in your face, hear it in your voice. You thought the quiet old librarian would either refuse or embarrass herself." Tom felt shame burn through him. "I'm so sorry. That was cruel and stupid and wrong. You didn't deserve that." Linda studied him for a moment. "No, I didn't, but in a way, I'm grateful you asked." "Grateful? You gave me a reason to face something I'd been avoiding for 40 years. You gave me a deadline, a goal, something to work toward. If you'd asked kindly, I probably would have said no. But because I knew what you were thinking, I wanted to prove something. Not to you, but to myself." Tom shook his head in wonder. "I came here to apologize, and somehow you're thanking me." "I'm not thanking you for being mean," Linda said, and there was steel in her voice. "I'm saying that sometimes the hard things, the painful things, they push us to grow in ways comfort never could. You made a mistake. You've apologized. That matters. Can I ask you something? Tom said. When you were up there playing, what were you thinking about? Linda looked down at her violin case. I was thinking about my husband, about everything I lost and everything I found, about the young woman I was and the older woman I've become, and I was thinking that maybe being broken and healed is more beautiful than never being broken at all. Tom left shortly after, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He still felt guilty, but he also felt changed. That music had cracked something open in him, and he wasn't the same person who'd walked into the community center that evening. Over the next hour, more people came to speak with Linda. Parents thanked her for showing their children what real courage looked like. Older folks shared their own stories of loss and resilience. Teenagers, who'd come expecting to be bored, told her how much the music had moved them. One young girl, maybe 16, waited until almost everyone else had left. She approached Linda shyly. Mrs. Chen, I play violin too. I've been playing since I was 6. I'm pretty good, actually. Good enough that my teacher thinks I could maybe go professional someday. Linda smiled. That's wonderful. But I'm scared, the girl continued, her voice dropping. I'm scared I'm not good enough. I'm scared I'll fail. I'm scared I'll spend my whole life chasing this thing and end up with nothing. Linda put down her violin case and gave the girl her full attention. What's your name? Rebecca. Rebecca, can I tell you something? There are no guarantees in life. You might succeed beyond your wildest dreams. You might face obstacles you can't imagine. You might end up somewhere completely different from where you planned. But here's what I learned. It's not really about whether you succeed or fail. It's about whether you're brave enough to try, and whether you're strong enough to keep going when things don't work out the way you hoped. Were you scared tonight? Rebecca asked, terrified. My hands were shaking so badly I almost walked off the stage before I started playing. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Linda confirmed. Because I decided that trying and failing was better than never trying at all. And you know what? Even if everyone in that room had hated my performance, even if they'd laughed at me, I would have been proud of myself for having the courage to try. Rebecca thought about this. I have a recital next month. It's a big one, with scouts from music schools. I've been so nervous I can barely practice. Then practice being nervous, Linda said. Practice playing with shaking hands. Practice making mistakes and continuing anyway. That's a skill too, and it's one you'll need no matter what you do with your life. They talked for a while longer, and when Rebecca left, she walked taller. The community center was almost empty now. Frank was starting to clean up, folding chairs and picking up programs that had been left behind. Helen helped Linda gather her things. Are you okay? Helen asked. That was a lot. I'm exhausted, Linda admitted. But I'm good. Really good. They walked out together into the spring night. The parking lot was nearly empty. Linda looked up at the stars, bright and clear above them. You know what David told me once? Linda said. He said that life isn't about becoming who you thought you'd be. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. Those aren't always the same thing. He was right, Helen said. He usually was. Linda went home that night and did something she hadn't done in years. She took out the photograph of her younger self, the one from her conservatory days. The girl in that picture looked confident, ambitious, certain of her future. Linda looked at her with compassion now, no longer with grief. I'm sorry you didn't get the life you planned, she whispered to the photograph. But the life I got instead, it wasn't so bad. She placed the photo back on the mantel next to David's picture. Then she set her violin beside them. The next week, something unexpected happened. Linda received a phone call at the library from the principal of Greenfield Elementary School. They'd heard about her performance. Would she be interested in starting a music program for children who couldn't afford private lessons? Linda said yes without hesitation. Within a month, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Linda was teaching a small group of children how to play violin. Some had natural talent. Others struggled with even basic notes. It didn't matter. She taught them all with patience and kindness, and she always told them the same thing. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. It's about feeling something and having the courage to share it. Tom Bradley became one of the program's biggest supporters, donating instruments from his store and volunteering to help with fundraising. He never mentioned his initial cruelty again, but his actions showed his remorse and growth. Frank, the janitor, started staying late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, just to listen to the lessons. The sound of children learning, Making mistakes, trying again, filled the community center with a different kind of beauty. And Helen continued to have tea with Linda every day. Their friendship deepened by everything they'd shared. Years later, people in Greenfield still talked about that night at the talent show. The night the quiet librarian played violin and made everyone cry. The night a whole room full of people were reminded that everyone carries more than others can see, that broken things can still make beautiful music, and that it's never too late to be brave. Linda lived in Greenfield for another 15 years. She taught music, she worked at the library, and she played her violin often, not for fame or recognition, but because music was part of her soul, and souls shouldn't stay silent forever. And whenever one of her students was scared to perform, scared to try, scared to fail, she'd tell them about a night in April when she walked onto a stage with shaking hands and a damaged violin and created something that changed a room full of strangers. The only real failure, she'd say, is not trying at all.